Hello and welcome to my studio. Today we're doing a review of the Silberschnitt 4000. This is a glass cutter that is favoured by a lot of stained glass makers as their preferred choice. I've never used it. A lot of you have recommended that I try it. So I bought my own version and I'm going to do a review of it now. The Silberschnitt 4000. Let's get started. Let's start our review of the Silberschnitt 4000 today with a quick unboxing. It comes in a little plastic container like this with some instructions. And as you can see here, it's made of brass. It's got a rotating wheel at one end, which is a tungsten carbide wheel, and a detachable stopper at the back end of the handle, which allows you to fill the cavity with a lubricating oil if you so desire. This is a very typical way that modern glass cutters oil the wheel with a hollow handle. It's not my favorite method because I find regardless of whichever oil cutter you use, it starts to leak. The seal just breaks down after a period of time. So I prefer this method of lubricating the wheel. I'm putting protective gloves on because I don't want to get my hands covered in oil. From a safety point of view, you don't want to handle glass with any oil on your hands at all. So get a little bit of WD-40 or sewing machine oil and squirt it in a container with a little piece of sponge in there and simply dip your glass cutter into the WD-40, and that is sufficient to give a good lubrication to the wheel, and that lasts for quite a period of time. As you can see here, it's not going to spill oil all over the place by simply doing that method. I've not used this glass cutter before, so I'm just working with a very simple glass to start with, clear float glass. This is the classic way of holding a glass cutter between your first and second finger like this, and it's the most convenient way. You might want to hold it in a stabbing motion like this or like a fork, but really the best way, if you can get used to it, is to hold it between your first finger and your second finger, especially if you're cutting strips. Remember, safety goggles. Always wear safety goggles when you're cutting glass. I'm using a set square here, just a small set square with a groove at the bottom. And this is really handy because it sits on the bottom edge of your glass like this and you can slide it along into position. This glass cutter also has a screw head for detaching the cutting head. With this particular glass cutter, the screw head faces towards you as you cut your glass rather than away from you. So I'm just doing a few early cuts here just to get used to it. It cuts very easily, very simply through the glass. So this is the easiest type of glass to cut, clear float glass. So it's not a great challenge for any glass cutter to cut clear float glass. I'm trying to use as few tools as possible when reviewing this glass cutter because I want to concentrate mostly on the glass cutter itself. Holding the glass cutter at an angle is key to its success, and you have to experiment to get that correct angle. It's applying enough pressure just to get that scoring motion to work on the glass. Whether you're pushing the glass cutter away from you or pulling the glass cutter towards you, it works just as well in both directions. So let's give ourselves a little bit more of a challenge and work with some textured glass. This granite back ruby red glass is quite a textured glass, so it is more of a challenge to cut with because any glass cutter has to negotiate the ups and downs of the textured surface. Again, the glass cutter makes easy work of this. This particular opalescent yellow is much more textured. It's also a harder glass, and as you can hear by the sound, it's much more difficult to cut. But again, the Silberschnitt seems to work with this glass very easily. So playing with different types of glass here just to get a feel for how it's working. And it seems to work really well. There's no issues at all with this glass cutter. It's a fresh cutting head, so I would expect it to get through all of these different types of glass with ease, as it does. Again, I'm holding the glass cutter in a different position here, almost like a pen, and I'm using my middle finger to support the cutting head while I'm cutting straight edges. So let's give ourselves a bit more of a challenge here and cut a more intricate shape using our granite back glass. I'm going to cut a star shape out here. This is always a challenge with any glass cutting process. This shape is always quite a challenge to cut, and it's a really good one, especially when you're reviewing a glass cutter, to try and cut a star out of it on some textured glass. Gently tapping the glass to encourage the fracture along the score line. Again, this takes quite a lot of practice to cut these shapes at different angles. I'm not using a set square or a T-square, I'm cutting it freehand, and it is much more challenging to cut a shape like this with a variety of different cuts into the glass. So there we have it, a star with the Silberschnitt glass cutter. Very pleased with the outcome, works really well. So the publicized angle at which you use this glass cutter is 138 degrees. I tend to find that that is a little bit shallow. I tend to use it at a slightly different angle here. And I prefer working with a steeper angle, more like a 70-degree angle like this. And I find that that allows me to apply more pressure to the glass, especially with different hard types of glasses. Again, you just need to experiment to get that angle that works best for you. But I suggest 70 degrees is about right. And you can see here, looking at it side on, this is how it looks in practice. Whether you're pushing the glass cutter forward or pulling the glass cutter towards you, try to keep it at around about 70 degrees angle like this to get good results. If you've not worked with a pencil cutter like this, an important factor to remember is the thickness of the glass cutter head. There is a difference between the edge of the glass cutter head and where the wheel is. It's actually 2.5 millimeters. There's a 2.5 millimeter gap between the cutting head and the center of the tungsten carbide wheel. This you've got to allow for, especially when you're cutting strips of glass. There's a 2.5 millimeter gap. So when you're measuring glass, say 20 millimeter glass, you've got to add 2.5 millimeters to allow for the thickness of the tungsten carbide head. So I've added 2.5 millimeters to my measurement size, and when I draw the glass cutter down and remeasure the glass, it should be the perfect width of 20 millimeters wide. The carbide head 441.5 is removable, and you can change it and replace it with a new head if this one becomes blunt. I don't anticipate that's going to happen any time soon, but it's easily removable and exchanged for a new head. So let's round up this review with final impressions of the Silberschnitt 4000 after having used it for a couple of days, cutting intricate shapes that would be typical when making stained glass windows. I've come to a few conclusions. First of all, it's beautifully made. When I took it out of the box, it really was quite substantial in its weight, typical German engineering. Everything is designed to last. The head itself is easily removable. The cost of replacement heads is something to bear in mind, as is the cost of the entire unit. I bought this in the UK for around £30. The Carbide 441.5 head is replaceable, and at the moment in the UK I can source it at about £30. That is quite a hefty price for a replacement head. I'm not anticipating that I need to replace this head anytime soon. My only real reservation with this product is its cost. It's substantially more expensive than other good quality glass cutters on the market, but it's built to last. So if you want to invest in a glass cutter that's going to last you for many years and give you untroubled service, I can recommend the Silberschnitt 4000 as a really good option. Thanks so much for watching today. Check out my other videos on my YouTube, lots of product reviews and tips and tricks on how to make beautiful stained glass windows made for you, the creative community. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.